Hello and welcome back to another of our We Are Developers Weekly Developer Shows. Now, usually this is live and you will notice that something's a little bit different, i.e. it's not live this week. We're recording this on Tuesday. You might be watching this on Wednesday, or with the magic of the internet, it could be any day of the week. So we're not going to worry about it too much. Now, you'll also notice that it's me again this week. We don't have Chris Heilman, our VP of DevRel this week. He's enjoying the final week of his holiday, well-deserved, works very hard. So it's nice to kind of unplug for a couple of weeks, which means you've got me for one more week. And it's okay, though. It's not just going to be me. I'm going to be joined by two guests. And so I'm going to bring them up on stage now. You may remember them from an episode of Coffee with Developers in the past. But we've got this week joining us, we've got Matthias Neumayer and Dima Rubanov. Let's bring them both up. There we go. The magic of the internet. How are you both, gents? Good to have you.
Hey, thank you so much for being back.
Yeah. It's I don't know how long it's been. You know, time flies, and a lot kind of changes every week when I'm doing this. You know, we're always sort of trying to cover a few stories from tech, and there's always way too much happening. So yeah, it's good to kind of have you both back and catch up a little bit. So what have you been up to? What's going on? You're over in Vienna. What's the latest?
We're good, thank you. We actually just came back from a kind of holiday workation kind of trip. We've been to Hong Kong business-wise for our product Laura for a week. That was great. We've made a few good connections, got a lot of interest for our product. And then afterwards, Matthias went to South Korea and Japan, and I went to Thailand and Singapore for a kind of workation for 4 weeks. So we've spent some time there and came back, maybe 2.5 weeks ago?
Yeah, something about that. Actually, just a quick ad here. If you are in Osaka and visiting the expo, in the Austrian pavilion, there's actually our child-friendly Laura to see a little bit about what we're doing. This is also why we went to visit Japan. And yeah.
Love it. I mean, I think, when we spoke to you before, you were just about to start your travels. So, I'm glad it went well. And I mean, we're going to get into what all of the products are that you guys work on. You're a double act. You're co-founders. You've built a few things together. We're going to explore a little bit what they are a little bit later on. And we're going to do that through some of the stories that I think when I think of both of you two, there's a number of topics that I kind of associate with you, I guess. And so we've put some of those in there that have come up in the news. Some are linked to your project. Some are things that maybe you share or are vocal or knowledgeable about on social media. So we'll get into it. But I wanted to start off. I've got a really kind of nice story to kick us off with, because it's I say nice. It's not nice, actually. It's just an unusual one. I thought it was an interesting story. So if you're not familiar with this term, slop farmer, it's we've all heard of kind of AI slop, let's call it low effort or low quality content that's produced by AI or with AI, with the intention of, it could be for engagement bait, it could just be to flood a particular website with content. And I found this one here that made me kind of look at things differently. In a minute, I'm going to ask you guys kind of what your thoughts are about, just this topic. Have you seen this slop farming or anything like this idea of AI slop? And the reason I'm asking you that is because of, you guys having created an app with AI very early on. It's all about high quality content. And so you've kind of got that to battle with. Now, this story here, you can see Slop Farmer boasts about how he uses AI to flood social media with garbage to trick older women. Now, it's not just older women, it's older people, but it shocked me when you read this. Somebody's very, very open about how they are using social media to create content, and they're targeting a demographic that they think won't really understand, the mechanics of kind of being online. They won't understand if content is real or not. They won't understand if they're being, rage baited, made angry by content. So I mean, have you guys had a look at this article? Have you had any thoughts on it? What was it? Does it concern you, slop farming? Is it a big concern? Dima, start us off.
Yeah. I had a look at it. I skimmed through it. Before that, I've never heard the term slop farmer, but of course, I'm familiar with kind of, a similar concept, which is usually called in the scene as programmatic SEO, where you basically kind of create, which is it doesn't have the malicious aspect of slop farming in that case, but the idea behind programmatic SEO, for anyone who doesn't know, it's basically where you create a lot of pages to tackle long tail keywords and basically capture, search engine results and stuff like that. But slop farming in that case has a very, very kind of malicious intent, I would say, especially when in the article the person is saying like, yeah, especially trying to kind of farm engagement from a user group for which it's hard to determine basically if it's real or not and what's behind it.
I actually already received scam calls with AI voices, which was very
Wow.
interesting. Like the real time voice API, obviously from ChatGPT, it was, I think. So we'll unfortunately probably see more of that coming up in the future. And yeah, I think those are the use cases where regulation would be important, because we don't want to become the dead internet theory to be actually true, maybe. And I think if in the internet gets flooded with AI generated content, it could happen that people will be overwhelmed by a flood of useless stuff, and also fraud will be increasing. So yeah, I think that is the bad side of AI.
Yeah, I mean, we've tried some AI generated content, especially for social media, which didn't work. Fortunately, I would say, I mean, it's unfortunate for the product that we've tried it for. But I basically once tried to generate taglines and images with AI, where I saw that on TikTok, I was getting views, for example, the 5 things you need to basically do to get a better bachelor thesis. But I didn't just do it with AI. I had some human oversight in it, but basically then created the images with a script to basically to have 30 or 40 variations of that image, which didn't work at all. So the views kind of dropped very quickly. So maybe there is some kind of human, I don't know, reaction to that where they kind of don't like, obviously, AI generated content. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is, and I think there's a whole debate there around sort of authenticity. You see it in music when we had the sort of move into kind of electronic instruments, and virtual instruments, and that idea of we lost authenticity, and we saw it again with things like MP3 and it moving from vinyl, and people saying you're compressing it, you're ruining the kind of how it's supposed to be, kind of originally consumed. And I suppose we see it now with whether it be artwork, we see it a lot with. As you're saying, copy, and I think you can often tell when it's got that kind of instinct, that smell. It just smells a bit sort of AI generated. Now that led me on to, you're saying about regulation, and this is something that I've always been interested in, kind of strangely, in things like copyright law. It's something that sounds very, very boring to people when they say, how can you be interested in that? But it's because it constantly throws up debates around authorship, who actually created something. If they perhaps remixed something from somebody else, is that something new, or is that just a remix of something that already exists? And I was sort of fascinated really to see Jack Dorsey, who was the co-founder of Twitter when it was Twitter, and then Elon Musk, who as we know owns X now, to say they would like to delete all IP law. Now, okay, it's not going to happen, right? We know that at least in the EU, that's definitely not going to happen. But it made me think, is it a good idea? Is there something in it? My first reaction was no, it's terrible. But is it actually a good idea? Matthias, when you see that idea of just, let's get rid of this IP law, good or bad?
I would say delete all is a bad idea, of course. But I think there are some things to saying maybe, there are restrictions of IP law, for example, for research, as we know. There are restrictions for different kind of use cases in education. So to have a debate on how we can tackle both interests, because there's always a conflict of interest. For one, you have the creators who obviously want to have some monetization, and it's also about credit, I think. And of course, the big AI companies, they want to get rid of all IP law because, of course, they have free training data. And that's also, I think, a very bad thing because you won't compensate the artists anymore. And you see that already in the music industry, where since the rise of Apple Music and Spotify, many artists struggle who are not able to get money out of big events. So On the other hand, also for open source, it's hard to get their hands on training data. If you want to train your own model and are not a big company, it's not always easy. For example, for us, also for LoRa, we need cooperation partners to work on to train our models. So, for example, I think one debate we could have is to say, maybe we shorten the years. So right now, many copyright laws are 70 years after the death of the last author. So maybe we could have a debate about saying maybe doesn't have to be 70 years. Maybe it could be shorter. Maybe it could be shorter for some use cases. So having an open debate would be interesting, but I think reading from two very, very rich people that they don't even want to pay the creators anymore is a bit ironic, even though they made the money with IP. So yeah, definitely, I don't agree, but I think the debate is something we can have.
I mean, this kind of sounds a little bit hypocritical. Yeah, let's delete the IP rights, which kind of don't touch me. And once it serves me, once I'm building Grok or any kind of system where it would be good to have no IP rights, I want those deleted. But the ones that would kind of affect my company, I want to stay and I want to use them to sue people. I mean, weird.
Yeah, and it's also a question of who is leading the debate, because actually we should hear from creators, we should hear from people actually working in AI, in science and research, and not from two tech billionaires.
I mean, I guess the difficult thing with this as well is that they're talking about it from the perspective of, like you're saying, Dima, how it might benefit them, but it would also not benefit them, right? If anything that they then create can also be exploited by other people because they then have no IP rights. I think what it does though is it's tapping back into that idea, Matthias, you mentioned it, the dead internet theory, and it's something that it's definitely been on my mind the last week, the amount of content that's being created. And I posed the question yesterday on social media about if the content that's being created by AI now is the training data for tomorrow, then it's just going to be a race to the bottom. Everything gets progressively worse over time. And if we're then taking away intellectual property rights, it's just a free-for-all for bad content to be produced and shared kind of without limits. It sounds like chaos and anarchy in a bad way. We're going to move on just because we've got quite a few kind of stories in here, and we want to kind of start working our way, I suppose, towards some of what you're both doing at the moment, really. So this one here made me think because it's a cautionary tale from Jacob Bartlett, and he talks about how I got exploited at my first startup. Now, neither of you have mentioned kind of an experience or anything like this in the past, but what you have mentioned is the fact that you've been in the position where you've spoken to potential investors and people that could get involved in your projects in a financial sense, and then has decided actually we'd like to bootstrap and we'd like to take this on our own. And I think that I commend you both for that, because you've also made very reasoned arguments about actually what the benefit would be of going with an investor, and how potentially the downsides might outweigh the upsides. Now, in this article here, this is about somebody saying, look, there were lessons I learned from dealing with a startup, because they weren't as legitimate as they potentially gave off that they were. They looked quite legitimate, and when it came down to it, actually there was some money and investors involved, but there was also very little to show for in terms of the product they were actually building. Now, this got me thinking a little bit about, you're a two-person team. And it's the culture that you've got. How do you have that culture between the two of you? Is there a boss built in? Does one of you have to do the chasing for the other person? Who's the spreadsheet side of things? How do things work? And do you ever think about bringing somebody else on, and what that culture would have to look like for them?
Yeah, well, so for me, maybe, I think we told you in our last conversation, Matthias and I have a little bit of a different background. Although we went to school together, we have a little bit of a different background. So I went into, did a bachelor's in business administration and then a master in finance in the UK, and Matthias studied law and film. Afterwards, I worked in consulting within the financial sphere, I would say, while Matthias founded his own marketing agency. And so here, you kind of already probably understand how our kind of roles within the startup, apart from the coding, are divided. So obviously, if there is any kind of financial issue, that's something that I would deal with. If there is something, I don't know, about taxes, or when we are filing for any kind of grants, if there is a financial forecast to do, once you're raising, for example, all the financial forecasts, presentations and outreach to the investors was done by me. If there is something about marketing, any kind of law related things, this is something where Matthias would come in, because of course, this is where his expertise lies. And anything else where I would say, like, if it doesn't mean like any kind of contract or something is just read by Matthias and I completely turn my brain off, of course, yeah. But as you can imagine, we try at the moment, as a 2-person founder team with a few freelancers, we kind of try to allocate our resources where they would have kind of the best outcome for the company. Yeah. So once, for example, we kind of got, like, how do you say, we got a letter from the Oscars, from the US.
Academy of Arts, of
Yeah.
the, how's it called? The
Academy of Arts.
Yeah.
So yeah, once we got a letter from the Academy of Arts to stop using our name Oscar or something like that, this is something that Matthias dealt with. He can tell the story much better than I did, but this was obviously his expertise. He studied law, and
tell us that story.
Yeah, basically, when we tried to file for our brand, so to protect our brand, the application form, they wrote us a letter where you have a period where you can object to someone forming a new brand. So basically, they did that, or at least they contacted us and were like, "Yeah, this is in conflict with the Oscars," but we actually had just an email exchange and had to pay some lawyer fees on our side, and we then told them we won't be doing film events, so that was enough for them. But they obviously have, even in Austria, one firm on hold to just file claims where they need some have maybe some in IP infringement or possible copyright claims or something like that. So yeah, some lawyers make a huge buck of money just to write letters to small startups. But we got along. Everything was fine. We didn't have a lawsuit, so that was good. But yeah, I mean, I was happy at that stage that I did my law degree because we were not sweating. Because of course they always come up with a huge amount of money you're gonna pay, blah blah. But to come back what Dima said, I think what I couldn't do this with anybody else than Dima, because we know each other for so long. We and I think contrary to the article you referenced, we both work our asses off all the time. And there's a huge amount of trust. And I think that is the most important part. And we make all decisions together. And we don't have any, we try to get ego out of the way in our decision-making process. We do stuff like this together because we are both co-CEOs. We don't have anyone who has more shares than the other person, etc., etc. And the article also resonated with me a lot because we often meet people at startup events who are like, "Oh, I have this business idea. I just need someone to execute the idea." And they're like, "I'm going to take 60% of the shares." But then many people don't realize that ideas are worth nothing. Yep. Everybody has ideas. The question is, can you execute them? Can you market them? Can you find product market fit? So I think many people overestimate their own value in a startup, and then sometimes often developers come into a team, they do the major load of work, don't own a lot of shares, and after 1 or 2 years they're like, "Oh, the guy that said he has a marketing background or was at McKinsey, what does he actually do?" And those partnerships can work out, but I think often you don't really know what does the other person bring to the table. And also for us, I mean, we're not per se against on bringing someone else in, but I think our partnership as it is now works great, and it would be probably a difficulty, and we also would see if a person can bring in stuff we really need at the moment.
I think there's so much in there you kind of tapped into, because it got me thinking then about the that side of running a business and running a tech business that doesn't really get talked about and is actually quite to some people it's quite off-putting, because they want to be building, right? They want to be writing code, or they maybe they want to be marketing. Probably not though, but maybe what developers are like. But potentially that's where they want to spend their time, and so the legal side of things is not always the most enjoyable. I know personally I run a corporate video production company, and it's my least enjoyable part is the legal side, because it's not creative, it's not why I do it, right? But what it made me think of as well is like terms like professional, it's really hard to define, and startup is kind of that as well. And what I've seen recently is this interchangeable use of the word startup. So what I mean is, so the word startup is being used interchangeably with things like project or website. And I found it this really strange blurring of the lines, in that it seems to have come along with the sort of phenomenon of vibe coding. We can just push, we can bring something together now in a day with a boilerplate and cursor, or whichever AI powered IDE you want to use. You can bring together a project, and then you can say, here's my new startup. And as soon as you've got your MRR, we've got $10 MRR, now we're a startup. And so it's really made me think about, this side of things, the culture, the legal side. The first thing you mentioned, Dima, was not the product. How interesting is that? It wasn't the product. It was actually when we're dealing with finances and when we're dealing with the legal side, because that's a lot of what running a startup is that. Yeah. So I think that's fascinating, and it's going to lead us on nicely to our next article. Let's just bring this one up here. So we're going to sort of work our way towards how Oscar Stories in particular, which is your mobile app, and I'll let you guys tell us more about it in a sec, but your mobile app, which was very, very, very quick to market in terms of when the AI kind of APIs came out, or ChatGPT API came out. And I want to just sort of think about how, when you're actually building a project, this article here mentions, putting things together and being able to iterate quickly and go to market quickly. That often means then we make decisions that are sort of powered by that, rather than necessarily the end user. And so this here is just this debate around microservices, or just using a monolith that's going to do everything for us. What's your approach? Do you stick to what you know? Do you go with is it everything AWS, or what's your sort of chosen technology when you're building something together? How do you make those decisions?
Well, I think the main deciding factor is what we know and what we're used to, because sometimes we are talking about architecture or backend, and then we're like, oh, we should do this and that, and we have some things in our backlog where it would be nice if we would split that into, I don't know, maybe implement a microservice, and we usually don't ever do that, to be honest, because we always pick the route that is the fastest, and for us the easiest. So I don't know, for example, for Oscar, the backend is probably the simplest we have in all of our projects, because it is an Express server running on Railway, and probably will move to Hetzner at some point, but that's another topic. But it's super simple, and basically we built it for our MVP, and then we just kind of build onto it, and it just works, and it works good, and it works with 100,000 users. So why change it? I mean, of course, there would be better architecture. There would be things that would be nice. But yeah, I mean, we kind of stuck. we are both proficient in TypeScript, JavaScript, and Python. So that is the languages we choose. Maybe it would be great to have a Go server, but I can't write code in Go. So why do that?
I think we have to overemphasize how important our chosen language is. It always reminds me of being at school when you maybe had to pick a subject, and the teacher that was maybe the drama teacher, they want, drama to them is the most important subject, right? Because it's the one they like. And I always see that with programming languages, people saying, oh, no, the performance of this is better than this. And their arguments are always because I like it, essentially. Dima, carry on. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I honestly think even about the choice of language or the choice of services, if it's, I don't know, if it's a Next.js project or whatever you're using, most likely, if it succeeds, it's not going to succeed because of that. And if it fails, it's also not going to fail because of that. Let's be honest here, like 99% of startups or projects or whatever we want to call them today fail, most likely because they just don't, either they don't solve a problem, either it's a bad product, or a lot of them, even if it's a good product, they just don't find the customer for some weird reason. Yeah, they just don't find the end user, they can't scale, and then they die. Not just because they used the wrong microservice or I don't know, chose the wrong programming language.
I mean, I have a story to share here. I mean, that one is on me. Our landing page for Oscar Stories is on Gatsby. I don't know if you're familiar with Gatsby framework, but it's actually complete overkill for a landing page like that. And also, I used an older version of Gatsby, and it's a pain to update. And this is spaghetti code. And also, Dima told me it's your responsibility to care about the landing page, because I'm not gonna dive into that. Good code of yours. And then we built internationalization on top of that, and all the struggles that come with it. And that's a task we have on since, I don't know, 1.5 years. Rewrite the landing page in Next.js, but probably we're never gonna do that. We don't have time for it.
No, and it's always going to be the least important thing, right?
It is our painful project. I don't want anybody to have to work on, but it is what it is, right? So it works, and
I mean, I guess when I heard that you guys take on freelancers, I just thought that's a job for them then. I mean, I think let's look a bit closer at Oscar Stories then. This is obviously the project that you, I first came across when I sort of met you guys online, and as I said, very, very early on in the days of ChatGPT, and I know we've talked about that in a kind of previous episode. But what was the kind of motivation for it? What was it that gave you the idea? Where did it come from? You went all in on it. You didn't spread yourself, going, we're going to do 12 projects in 12 days. It was, we're going all in on this. And you've done a great job of it. Obviously, you've grown it, as you said, to 100,000 users. And it's, as you said just then, very international now. You've got multiple languages supported. There's quite a technical challenge there in overcoming that and building it. But what was the original motivation? And were there any things like regulation that you came across that made it difficult or a scary sort of sector to try and enter when you were making something for kids?
Matthias, do you want to introduce?
Okay. Yeah, so basically, Oscar is the name of my godchild, and so the idea for Oscar came about when we were actually talking to different friends of ours who were young parents, and about the topic that if you come home after a long day of work, to have the creativity to invent a bedtime story for kids, and also kids want to have a good bedtime story, and they want to control what kind of things have to be in the story. And we were actually experimenting with GPT-3 at that time for a totally different startup idea, which is still the legal name of our company, by the way. And so then Dima said, hey, let's build that, and we should build it fast, which is what we did. And then we were very quick on the market and had a very rough MVP out there. And we grew very fast and had a lot of first users and got great feedback. And because of the traction, we decided to go all in. So to basically say, okay, this is now our thing. We're going to do that. And I think we were just driven by our users and the market. And that was the deciding factor, because before, when we did our other project, which never saw daylight, we were not talking to users. We were building for 1 year behind closed doors, and we kind of pulled the reverse with Oscar Stories, and that was a good decision.
Yeah, exactly. So I believe, honestly, most of the decisions for Oscar Stories were driven by some kind of, I wouldn't call it FOMO, but we actually wanted to, bring something to market very, very fast. I mean, the first version that we released to the App Store, if you were to try to change your password, the app would crash. So I mean, a lot of things didn't work at then, and we didn't even have payment. We didn't have anything. So basically, we just released a bare bone app with some acceptable design, which we believed at that time was kind of acceptable, and started speaking to the first users. And the improvements just came from there. And I honestly believe that this is something which most people should do, where a lot of things go wrong by finding an idea, finding a few investors, maybe getting funding for that idea without traction. I mean, it's even more difficult today than it was, I don't know, 2-3 years ago. But I think a lot of people have learned from that, where you just kind of build in the dark, then you release something, and then you realize, hey, I'm the only customer for it, for the use case.
Yeah, and it's a good thing if you have a lot of support tickets, because that means that people are actually interested in your project and your product, and they want to use it and are not satisfied with your features or etc., or something doesn't work. But that's a good sign. So before we were thinking, oh, you have a lot of support tickets, your product is not good enough. No, if you don't have any support tickets, then you have a problem, because no one is interested in your project. And that's also, as you're showing, why we built LoRa, because we realized from the feedback we got that current GPT models or AI models are not good enough in producing child-appropriate language. And this is why we had the idea to fine-tune our own LLM. And we already have good results with the first models we trained. We already trained bigger models right now, which we haven't released yet. And this is basically why we did that, and to tackle
here we're also working with Fachakademie. What is it? How do you say it in English, Matthias? It's basically like a
educational institution.
Educational institution. Yeah. Because what LoRa will try to do, or basically the idea behind LoRa, is that if your son or your daughter, for example, is interested in construction sites, we just realized that the educational aspects of Oscar stories bring much more traction than than anything else. Yeah. So if your son or daughter, for example, is interested in a specific topic, we can leverage that to teach them something. In our case, it would be STEM subjects. So for example, if it's construction sites, wouldn't it be very convenient to teach your son the concept of gravity by Isaac Newton within a personalized story within their favorite setting? Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, as a dad myself, and a former teacher, it's something that I find I just automatically try and do. It's like any game I'm playing with my daughter, I try and make it's in some way you're testing her, you're seeing what she knows, what she can do, can't do. So to see these kinds of projects is really exciting, because I think that the key thing for me, especially having been a teacher, was if you make something interesting, then the learning will just happen along the way. And that if you find a way of making a topic about something that somebody is interested in, exactly like you said, the interest in construction sites, the learning just almost osmosis. It just happens because they love being there, they're enjoying what you're talking about or what they think you're talking about, and then they pick something up. So I think it's really, really fascinating to see kind of what you're doing now, extending out from doing Oscar stories to now, okay, let's look at how we can bring in our own models. Now, this article, just to sort of tie this on, really, it was something that it's always been in the back of my mind again, and it's kind of that wider topic of the way that young people are using technology more than us, and we are from the same or similar generation that grew up with technology. We were constantly, whether on our computers and then later on smartphones, we grew up with technology most of the time. Young people today have grown up with it all of the time, and it's a very online world now. So I think just to sort of I suppose show the other side of what you guys are doing, where you're creating very conscious projects that are looking to actually solve a problem, but in a conscious and ethical way. To just see this here with there we are. Still, roughly 1 in 5 say that social media sites hurt their mental health. So you've got that other side where it's for many projects, it's just about keeping people on the app as long as they possibly can, right? Was that something you had to consider? Like, is there a point when we don't want people to actually spend their whole life on the app that we're building for them to use?
Actually, it's a huge topic for us. It's also one of the major reasons we implemented TTS very early on. And we also implemented an option to print out stories, because we didn't want to force the parents to use our app with the children all the time. So we had this idea in our minds that so most of our customers, they generate like 3 to 5 stories per week. So not every day, but it's kind of part of the routine. But it's a process of reading the bedtime story together and having a habit together and having a social experience. It's not about here, kid, here's the smartphone, have fun and be quiet for 2 hours. So that's not the vision we have in mind. And I think technology is great and important to improve education. But also there's always 2 sides of the coin. So we have to be mindful of how people are going to use it. And I think a major part also for social media is because my mom is also a teacher, and she sees this in school. I think that's topics like cyberbullying. There's topics like how am I looking and how I'm gonna present myself, not only in a social group but also on social media. So that topic is even broader and has more complications than just an app that you're doing. But yeah, I think as a startup, you should also think about ethical concerns.
Yeah, and I think it's also important, not only as a startup, but even as a society, to think about ethical concerns, because Matthias just now mentioned this, yeah, how do I look like? I mean, there's been a debate at some point, I remember, where people wanted to kind of force social media companies to declare that somebody was using a filter, yeah, for an image or a video and stuff like that. I mean, I understand maybe for Instagram or for TikTok, it's bad for business, where you say, whenever somebody is using a filter, that it says like, yeah, this person used, I don't know, a skin glow, whatever, make me younger, 10 years younger filter. I understand that from a business perspective. But if we see that a lot of younger people see those images and then become kind of, I don't know, self-conscious, or they suffer mental health issues and stuff like that, shouldn't we as a society kind of decide that this is bad? That, I mean, this rule may harm those businesses in the long term or even short term, doesn't matter, but it would benefit our society as a whole. I mean, yeah, this is a kind of question that I believe.
I guess it's also, that these things are only going to get worse, right? As the kind of the world and the online world become one, really. They just become more and more intertwined. And I think that the separation isn't there. So then, as you said, things like cyberbullying. I remember somebody said to me once, in the past, if you were being bullied, at least it was only at school. Now it's at school and then on the phone on the way home and when you're at home, etc.
Yeah, and in Austria, there's actually now a huge discussion about banning smartphones in schools completely. Which I think there's a lot going for it, because my mother sees this also all the time. People are on their phones in school. They're not paying attention. They are doing TikToks of other people without them consenting. And that can be problematic, especially in a young age. So I think there's some, I think also the problem is people always were talking about digital natives and that people are digital natives just because they use a smartphone. And I think that's bullshit, because you don't learn technology just by being a customer. You learn technology by learning technology. And I think we should get rid of this idea that people are more proficient in digital tools just because they grew up with them. Yes, maybe they are more proficient than our grandparents, but it's not a skill per se, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there we could unpack, and I know we're going to run short on time, so I will take us on. But it's a really, really fascinating debate, because I think that the idea of kind of technological ethics and it being linked to our business practices, and then it may be impacting profits, but potentially that's the price you need to pay. There's a whole debate there. I just want to move us on, and I'm actually going to come back in 1 second and talk about IntelliPaper, and we're going to sort of explore some of the topics around it. Because there's a couple of pieces of regulation that have come up recently that kind of link to this project, and you can tell us a little bit more about it. But I just wanted to on that topic, really, when we're talking about kind of the use of social media, and we've got that callback to AI. This was just something that I'm only just going to sort of show here on the screen. We won't get into it too much, but I thought it was fascinating and scary about really the speed at which AI is developing. And it's showing here that there's a viral trend of reverse location searching from photos. And I thought this was really quite creepy. You don't know who's doing the reverse searches, but also why they're picking random people's posts to do it on. But it's showing quite how clever AI is at the moment with using that reasoning and looking at a few details and analyzing images and actually essentially being a very good geoguesser. So I thought that was just quite a scary one, but it kind of links in with that idea of ethical use of technology. Okay, now just to finish off, I'm going to kind of focus on just these few final links here. So just to give a little bit of background, just going to close one or two. We don't have time for those, but it's all good. We've got two pieces of regulation really that are sort of floating around, and when I say that, I mean they're either about to go into full force or they have done recently. Now, one is the European Accessibility Act, which is obviously looking at the standards around accessibility, and you can see here in June 2025, so not far from now, about a month's time, the deadline is for enforcement passes, and this is when the expectations over the accessible nature of websites and projects and apps and tools is the standards are going to be very, very clear around what's acceptable, what isn't, what's good enough, and there's fines and things in place if people are not kind of complying. Now, the second part is this here when we're looking at the EU AI Act, which of course is going to be something that you guys will have, I'm sure, read quite a lot about, and actually decided you could make a tool to help others learn a little bit about that and some other papers. There we go here. So we've got two different sites or pages from your site to talk about. So just to give us the background before we get into kind of these two pages here, who'd like to start us off with what IntelliPaper is and what's the problem you're solving with it?
So yeah, IntelliPaper is basically a tool that at first started off as basically just a PDF chat because we were experimenting a lot with RAG, we were experimenting a lot with vector stores, LLMs in general, and so on. And at some point in our work for Oscar stories and et cetera, we started to work a little bit more with vector stores. And obviously then the idea came, all right, let's build a PDF chat and make a business out of it and basically put a paywall in front of it and start building on top of that. And at some point, again, as through talking with users and so on, as we usually do it, as we learn how to properly do it from Oscar stories, we started to build a few more tools on top of that. So it kind of developed into an all-in-one suite for researchers and students at the moment. And now we're also branching out a little bit more towards people just working in various industries. And especially for people who have to work with large PDF files on a daily basis. That's why we have the PDF chat. People who have to research a lot of PDFs, we have the literature research function, which basically works by connecting Semantic Scholar API. So we have access to over 200 million research papers, which you can query with the help of AI. So basically you just type whatever you want. You can ask it like, yeah, what's the point of creatine? And it's going to go through the abstracts and papers and then give you an answer with the sources. And if you need to kind of publish or write kind of a research paper or whatever, you can use the AI editor to basically combine those previous tools.
So was this, when you say this came out of your work with Oscar Stories, what was it that actually led to you? Because it seems quite different, right, on the surface. Yeah. What was the sort of link?
It doesn't actually have necessarily to do anything with Oscar Stories itself, but it's just basically once you're into the AI space, you kind of try out different things. And at some point you end up with, oh, well, vector stores, RAG, hey, let's do that. That's more of a, we didn't want to build it into Oscar Stories or anything. It was just as our overall thing with working with LLMs and AI.
I mean, there's actually one bridge. So we're thinking about using LoRa to translate PDF documents in simple language. So there is a link where everything comes back together. But I think if you, as Dima said, in the AI space, you sometimes have ideas that float around in your head you want to do, or you're just experimenting with different tools. And then we built the product. We saw that people use it, that people like it. And especially in the German-speaking market, we have a lot of customers. We're right now doing internationalization. And then also thought about doing free tools for people who were confused by the AI Act or different kinds of regulation, to give them a bit of perspective. And I know not a lot of people are going to read the AI Act. I think one draft had 300 pages. So I think AI is great to summarize these kinds of documents and to simplify them into easier language and make them more understandable. And especially AI literacy right now, there's a requirement by the EU AI Act. That's one topic where a lot of people don't know how to implement that, what to do, because it's a bit confusing in the way it's written. But there's actually living repositories, so we thought, why not upload that and give people the opportunity to chat with it? Because I think there's also a lot of fear running around by consulting agencies who want to make a lot of money by telling you, oh, if you're not compliant, you have these big fines to pay. And in the end, it's not that difficult to comply, in my opinion. But of course, you have to spend time on reading up on the topic and thinking about how you're going to implement that in your organization.
I think for me as a former teacher, it threw up a really. My first response, I suppose, was in my head, "Oh, I wish this was around 5 years ago." And I mean, obviously, we know it wasn't really possible. The APIs were so rudimentary. Everything was very new. It was that new frontier, people experimenting. We didn't really know exactly what the issues were that we were going to need to solve. But the issue that I saw was that almost overnight, when ChatGPT came in, it changed education. Now, I was teaching filmmaking, so it was a practical, hands-on subject that you would think isn't affected by AI, but there's obviously written elements to it. And you have some things like essays. We didn't do a whole load of them because they're sort of limited with how applicable they are, but you'd have 1 or 2 essays, and overnight, it just made almost the whole thing pointless. Because it wasn't about learning about how much somebody understood a subject. It was just, can they ask the right prompts to get an essay that will trick the lecturer into thinking it's real? And overnight, you had issues where students would swear to you they had written this thing that you knew 2 weeks before they wouldn't have been able to have written. So AI was being used, and it was almost impossible to definitively say that it had been used, even though we know it had. And the only way we could actually tell if something had used AI was by checking the sources and finding the ones that weren't real. Now, that essentially means we had to go and hunt for the hallucinations, and we could see there were hallucinations because we could see names that we would say, that sounds strange, who's this? And they would refer to this person as like a well-known speaker. So we're saying, well, they're not that well-known because we're the lecturers and we've never heard of them. And then you knew. Now, that's the problem you're trying to solve, right? But how do you deal with that in your own tool? Do you ever find that it perhaps hallucinates and makes up sources? Does it are those sources in that database, the academic database, are they legitimate, or have they got hallucinations within them? Is that something that's come up when you've been building this or not?
Yeah, of course, it's a huge issue. So basically the idea, or one of the main reasons that our customers say why they're using the PDF chat in the first place is to eliminate those hallucinations. Because if you would upload it randomly to ChatGPT and so on, you would still get those typical LLM hallucinations. I mean, some people don't even exactly need the sources where you, for example, in our program, like if you ask it something, you can then click on the page where the source comes from. Basically, it will take you to page, 12 of the document and so on. But in general, this is one of the main reasons why our customers said that they're using it is to eliminate those hallucinations.
And I think there's one quote we heard at the conference. I think it was by a person from NVIDIA that said building RAG is easy, but building functioning RAG is pretty difficult. Which I think is true, because in our case, it's not so much about which LLM we use, but more about how to, on a technical perspective, how to do retrieval, how to get the right context, how to do RAG in a way that you get the right sources. And that is, I think, one of the major topics where we try to have a really high quality rec system for talking to the PDFs, talking to documents, and doing literature research. But of course, it's also hard for us to explain to the customer, hey, look, our tool is better than that tool from a technical perspective, because you just see it if you use it regularly. So yeah, but it's a huge topic, of course.
It is, and I think, maybe we'll end there, because RAG is a whole kind of episode on its own at the moment, and I think we'll definitely get you back to hear a little bit more about kind of your experiments with it and how it's working for you, because yeah, we hear it quite a lot. It's coming up progressively more as a subject, so for sure we'll get you back. Okay, now, gents, I know that you have to leave sharpish, and just again to say thanks so much for giving us your time. It's been great to get a little bit of an update on what's going on, and I still need to download Oscar Stories, because I've been promising it to my daughter in Portuguese. So there we go. But I promise you'll see a download in about 2 hours. I promise you. So just again to say a massive thank you to anybody who's watching this. I say go and check out Matthias and Dima either on social media. I've got you both over on Blue Sky, or you can go and check out Oscar Stories or IntelliPaper, and always keep up to date with what they're doing. And of course, follow them both on LinkedIn, because you definitely have some interesting debates going on your feeds, and I always appreciate seeing you both. So until next time, thanks again. It's great to have you both.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. See you soon.